In the United States, supporters of the present Iranian regime have recently begun a campaign aimed at convincing Americans, politicians and populace, that the international sanctions against Iran are responsible for the collapse of the Iranian economy. They claim, too, that these sanctions, by causing medical shortages and skyrocketing food prices, will cause the death of hundreds of thousands of Iranians. They argue that it is not the Iranian Mullah regime, but the international community and its imposed sanctions against the Mullah regime that has ruined the country. Under the current regime, Iranians have been suffering from prescription drug shortages since long before international sanctions were imposed. Now, this persistent lack of adequate medical supplies has reached a state of crisis. The main reason for this is the collapse of the Iranian economy, but we argue that this results from governmental mismanagement because the Mullah regime dedicates Iran's resources to priorities other than food and medical supplies, so essential for the people's well-being. As popular discontent grew in Iran over increasing drug shortages, the regime began blaming international sanctions for its own failure. Former President Hashemi Rafsanjani started this campaign in a speech. Next, his daughter, Fatemeh Rafsanjani, in a letter to the UN Secretary General, supported her father's allegation that sanctions are the root cause of drug shortages in Iran. Then Ahmad Gavidel, head of an Iranian clinic for hemophilia patients, echoed the Rafsanjani's claim in a letter he sent to international health organizations. Soon, a Blame the Sanctions campaign was started in the US. This is carried out by a coalition of people and organizations in the US that are coordinated by NIAC and its president, Trita Parsi. These are the same people who, for the past 15 years, have been lobbying to lift sanctions and pressures against the Iranian Mullah regime. As Trita Parsi explained in a 1997 memo, they lobby the US government and Congress in order to persuade them to adopt a more Iran-friendly position. Parsi advised the US government that it should accept the Iranian regime's influence and share the Middle East with the Mullahs. So, are sanctions the main obstacle to the importation of prescription drugs into Iran? Are sanctions the cause of the current health crisis? On July 31, 2012, President Obama clearly stated that sanctions shall not apply with respect to anyone conducting transactions enabling the sale of food, medicine, or medical devices to Iran. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, Licensing Division, has stated their readiness to accept applications for transactions involving food or medicine. Statistics show that the 70% increase in trade between the US and Iran is chiefly for food and drugs. This indicates that the channel to import drugs into the country is not closed. Of course, new sanctions on the Iranian financial system have created difficulties with importing drugs through the traditional banking system. Mehrdad Emadi, EU economic advisor, has recently affirmed that the EU suggested a specific channel to Iran to import needed medicine, but demanded an assurance from Iranian authorities that they will not use this channel to import banned products. The Iranians refused this assurance. Emadi also explained that, in the past, the EU and Iran had used this means to import food until Iranians filled the supposed food containers with other products, demonstrating that they could not be trusted. All evidence shows that the real reason for the serious drug shortage in Iran is not due to international sanctions, but to the regime's refusal to commit adequate funds for importing basic necessities, including drugs. On one occasion, however, the Iranian regime did use its money and resources to import drugs. A German firm was caught selling drugs to Iran that could be utilized during interrogations to obtain confessions from prisoners. Our position is supported by knowledgeable Iranians. The head of the Health Commission in Iran's parliament, Hossein Shahariari, has recently stated that The government does not allocate funding for import of medicine. Surprisingly, the head of the Center for Hemophilia Patients in Iran, the same man who wrote that letter blaming sanctions for medicine shortage in an interview 3 months ago, now puts the blame on the Iranian government. We have reached the conclusion that the main reason for the shortage of drugs is governmental mismanagement by a lack of proper planning to import drugs. Facing a collapsing economy and serious lack of revenue, this regime has continued to finance a costly nuclear program, missile development, support for its regional proxies and allies in Syria, support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. It also provides huge loans for projects in Latin American countries such as Ecuador, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, since the expansion of its influence is one of the regime's priorities. We just mentioned a few of the present government's spending priorities. By putting the blame on international sanctions while expressing sympathy for the Iranian people, pro-regime lobbyists have a twofold strategy. Primarily, they seek to delegitimize present sanctions, thus slow down or halt the drive for more sanctions. Also, they seek to give a human face to their anti-sanction lobby. This goal is exactly what Trita Parsi wrote in a memo he sent Roy Coffey, the well-known Washington lobbyist, who worked for him in 2002 when he started NIAC, whose goal is to remove sanctions against Iran. In this memo, obtained during a defamation lawsuit brought by NIAC against Hassan Daei, Parsi explains to Coffey just how their lobbying should have a human face. Let's read this part of the memo. Although the mission of the proposed lobby should be to improve relations between the US and Iran and open up opportunities for trade, the initial targets should be less controversial issues such as visas and racial profiling, discrimination. Despite its predominantly business-oriented constituency, it is essential that the lobby creates a human face for its aims and goals. AIPAC successfully painted the opponents of the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act as greedy businessmen who had no scruples when it came to doing business with terrorist regimes. The oil companies failed to characterize their campaign with human concern for the well-being of innocent Iranians stuck with a dictatorial regime, or support for the poor Midwestern family father who lost his job due to the sanctions. The human element is essential both when it comes to attracting support among Iranian Americans and when it comes to winning the debate and the votes on the Hill.